Lift up your heart and praise. Lift up your hands and praise. Lift up your voice and praise.
And Moshe said, Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to everyone worshiping with us at home. We're going to be having the third part in our Gentile being series, and the name of the message today is What Have You Been Doing? All right, today we're going to pick up where we left off as we study into this idea that the apostles were advancing two different standards between believers who were genetically Israelites and Gentile believers. Now, in past studies we have looked at Abraham in particular because he seems to be the standard by which Elohim calls people. You see, there are those today who teach that not only is there a different standard between Israelite believers and Gentiles, but that goes all the way to the seal of righteousness of circumcision, which Yahweh gave to Abraham. All right? This misconception comes primarily because of the writings of Paul and the requirements in Acts 15 put on the Gentiles who were turning to Elohim by the apostles, or the taught ones of Yahushua. Right? This was a result of a dispute between the Pharisees, who were Pharisee believers, and a group that came, which came to be known as the circumcision, is who they became to be known as, and the taught ones of Yahushua over this matter. All right? The Pharisees said that Gentiles who are turning to Elohim have to be circumcised right away. Can't be saved otherwise. But the taught ones of Yahushua, at the suggestion of Jacob, which is James, agreed to this. Let's look at Acts 15. Acts 15. I'm going to start reading in verse 19. We're going to be on page 1068 in the 98 ISR. Acts 15, verse 19. Therefore, I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from whoring, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregation every Sabbath. Now, we know that this does not say for them to never get circumcised, does it? No, it doesn't. It demonstrates an expectation for that a Gentile who's turning to Elohim would go and advance in their understanding of the Torah, and most assuredly they would learn about the necessity of circumcision while there, just not all at once. All right? This is actually Paul's point, and all the things that he points out about Abraham. But as Peter said concerning Paul's writings, the unlearned and the unstable twist them to their own destruction. Okay? Romans chapter 4, I think we're going to start there today. Romans chapter 4, we're going to start reading in verse 9. We're going to be on page 1089. Romans 4, verse 9. Is this blessing then upon the circumcised only, or also upon the uncircumcised? For we affirm, belief was reckoned unto Abraham for righteousness. How then was it reckoned? Being in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. And he received the sign of circumcision. Now look at this. A seal of the righteousness of belief while in uncircumcision. All right? And as we pointed out at our last message, this should not be overlooked, what we just read. Abraham the Gentile, who had turned to Elohim, received the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness, of belief. For him to be, as we continue on in verse 11, for him to be a father of all those believing through uncircumcision, for righteousness to be reckoned to them also, and the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the belief which our father Abraham had in uncircumcision. Now, did you notice it called Abraham a father a couple of times there? Get to that. So Abraham walked the walk, and in the steps of the belief that he had in uncircumcision, he walked the walk. And then what did he do? He got circumcised and received the seal of righteousness of belief. Yahweh did not compel Abraham to be circumcised first. All right? And since there is no command for a new convert to be circumcised right away, Paul defers to Abraham's experience. And it seems like that's what the taught ones were doing too. All right. Another thing that Paul does here is that he refers to Abraham as father. Father of the uncircumcised and father of the circumcised. I will tell you that there is a genetic component to the literal seed of Abraham. Right? There is a genetic component. Paul himself alludes to that at certain times. But, quote, seed of Abraham is also used metaphorically to denote what a true follower and believer is. That's why all this attention to to father, seed, belief, walking in righteousness of Abraham, etc. Now, it has been, through the ages, common for students to refer to their teachers as father, master, leader, and the like. Right? The Yehudim were doing this long before the Catholics became famous for it. They really were. All right? The Catholics seem to have even adopted some of it from the Yehudim. All right? Give you an example. Have you ever heard of an abbey? All right? An abbey is a monastery run by an abbot. All right? There you go. Abbot originates from the word Abba. How about that? All right? What does Abba mean? It means father. All right? Now, Yahushua said something about not calling men that, didn't he? He did, but he seems to be speaking in a particular sense. So let's look at Matthew 23 for a minute. Matthew 23, and I think that you'll remember while we're turning there, this is the chapter where Yahushua really put it to the scribes and the Pharisees. This is where he said things like brood adders and whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones, and all that stuff. All right, now this is how the chapter starts out, but he's talking in this chapter about their unrighteousness, regardless of what they look like. He's talking about their unrighteousness as well as their hypocrisy. Verse 1. Then Yahushua spoke to the crowds and to his taught ones, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe, that'd be Moses. Therefore, whatever they say to you to guard and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. That kind of indicates right there that you're not supposed to let them be your leader. All right? Verse 4, for they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not wish to move them. And they do all their works to be seen by men, and make their tefillin wide, and lengthen the tzitzit of their garment. And they love the best places at feasts, and the best seats in the congregations, and the greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. So, he's pointing out that they love to be esteemed and recognized for their piety. Amen? Okay. Verse 8. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, He who is in the heavens. And keeping this in context with who he's talking about and what they like to do. All right. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself shall be humbled. Whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. All right. Don't need to expound on that a whole lot, do we? That's pretty clear. All right. All right, now, keeping this in context, we see that he's referring to exalting and being exalted. So, here are some terms that are relevant and why Yahushua is using these. All right. The first one I'm going to give you here is not used here, but hopefully you'll see the relevance to it as we go along. The first one is the Hebrew word ben. All right. Now, ben means what? Sons or children, your offspring. Right? Ben is made up from the letters bet and nun. Okay, pictographically, what you have there is you have a bet, which is a tent footprint, and you have a sprouting seed. All right, and put together, it means the seed that sprouts from the tent or the house. Okay, that's how Ben winds up pictographically defining what your offspring are. Your offspring, Ben. All right. The seed that springs forth from the tent of the house are the sons or the children. All right. Now the next one we're going to look at is Rab. All right. That's where we get rabbi or Rabbi. All right. And it comes from a resh and a bet. All right, so we got the 10 again. All right. Pictographically, it's the head of a man and the tent. Rab. That means, pictographically, that means the master or the head of the house. All right. Rab. Now it also means abundance, but it seems to indicate from the abundant strength of the master, or the master who brings abundance to the house. All right. Now keep that in mind as we look at the word for father, because do you remember what father? How it's spelled? Aleph bet. It's an ox head, and there's the bet again. And pictographically, when we put these together, it's understood to express the strength of the tent or the strength of the house. All right. Do you see how similar Rab being the head of the house and Ab being the strength of the house? How similar those are in their definition. All right. When we say Rabbi or we say Abi, it means my master or my father, respectively. It also means it respectively. All right, my father or my master. They are titles which students would put on those who were their teachers. All right, now, Yahushua is condemning these Pharisees for desiring to be lifted up by others who subordinate themselves to men like this, regarding themselves as taught ones or disciples of theirs. All right. That's not hard to see when they're calling them Rabbi, my master, or Abi, my father. All right. Now, he's also instructing his taught ones not to be exalted, but rather to humble themselves to one another and call one another brother. All right. Now, the reason that I shared this part about Ben being the seed that sprouts from the house is that it demonstrates how these guys find themselves in the my father and my son relationship. Okay? The disciples are the seed that springs forth from these various teachers. they refer to these teachers' disciplines as the house of so-and-so. All right? Like you've heard of the house of Hillel or the house of Shammai. Well, they are what springs forth from these houses. That's how they wind up being seed of the house. That's how these guys wind up being the master of that house. And they refer to him thus. All right? Now here's another one for you. The word doctor. The word doctor actually comes from a Latin word for teacher. Okay? That's why your professors in college are called what? Doctors. Okay? Not having anything to do with medicine. All right? They're teachers. All right? A doctor instructs his students with his doctrine. Okay? That's what a doctor does. They give doctrine. In other words, a doctor indoctrinates. See that? The doctor indoctrinates. At Merriam-Webster online, for doctor, definition 1A and 1B are: 1A is Christianity. An eminent theologian declared a sound expounder of doctrine by the Roman Catholic Church, called also doctor of the church, and B, a learned or authoritative teacher. All right? Do you know where a person desiring to receive religious doctrine goes? They go to a seminary. Okay? To get inseminated. Now listen, I'm not trying to be funny here. I know it sounds... The root word here is semen. For seminary. Okay? All right? And just like seed in the Scripture, to mean that which is sowed in the field to bring forth offspring, all right, or sowed in a woman to bring forth offspring, it also means that sowed through a teacher, which brings forth offspring from that as well. All right? They get seeded. They get inseminated at the seminary with the doctrine of the teachings from my teacher, my master, my father. All right? That's how that goes. My daughter had a teacher in high school who was a doctor. I'm not going to tell you doctor who. He was a doctor, and he was very quick to correct them if they called him Mr. So-and-so. I'm doctor. Huh? Yahushua has a problem with these men seeking their own esteem, and he wants his taught ones to abstain from such, but to be humble. All right? But it seems that even with Yahushua, he was at ease with referring to Abraham as a father of teaching when it came to walking in belief and obedience to Yahweh. Okay. All right? And one quick side note here. You can turn with me here. Look at Galatians 3 for just a second. And I remind you that Paul was a Torah observant man. We'll touch on that real quick before we conclude today. Galatians 3, we're going to start reading in verse 28. So we're going to be on page 1129. Galatians 3:28. There is not Yehudi, Jew, nor Greek. There is not slave or free. There is not male and female. For you are all one in Messiah. Now before we go on, we know that Paul knows there really are all of these things he just mentioned, right? We know he knows that. He knows that there's male and female. He's talked in other times about inappropriate relationships between the two, okay? He's making a point here. Paul talks colorfully lots of times, all right? Verse 29. And if you are of Messiah, then you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. The Greek word for seed there, and in many other places in the New Testament writings, is sperma. Keep hearing people go, huh? So we see that this idea is not simply confined to physical reproduction, but it's used, just like this, it's used metaphorically to describe reproduction of belief and behavior as well. Do you see that? Okay, so why did I spend all this time on that? Because it helps us to understand why all of the attention spent on Father Abraham in the sense that Paul and Yahushua use it in the following passages. Now, remembering how much attention has been given to Father Abraham thus far in his letter to the Romans, let's turn to Romans 5. We'll start reading in verse 19, page 1090. And when we get to verse 21, when we get into that, we're going to keep reading right on into 6, okay? Romans 5:19. And notice also how much Paul, the person that they like to say is, doing away with the Torah and whatnot, notice how much he talks about obedience and disobedience and righteousness and unrighteousness as we read through these things, all right? 5:19. For as through the disobedience of one man, many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one, many shall be made righteous. And the Torah came in besides, so that the trespass would increase. But where sin increased, favor increased still more. So that as sin did reign in death, now I want you to start paying attention to all of these things that Paul starts talking about reigning over us, because it's important. All right? So that as sin did reign in death, even so favor might reign through righteousness to everlasting life through Yahushua Messiah our Master. 6:1. What then shall we say? Shall we continue to sin to let favor increase? Let it not be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it? Or do you not know that as many of us were immersed into Messiah Yahushua, were immersed into his death? We were therefore buried with him through immersion into death, that as Messiah was raised from the dead by the esteem of the Father, so also we should walk in newness of life. For if we have come to be grown together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also of the resurrection, knowing this, that our old man was impaled with him, so that the body of sin might be rendered powerless, to serve sin no more. Remember who was reigning over us a while ago? So that we serve sin no more, longer. 7. For he who has died has been made right from sin. And if we died with Messiah, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Messiah, having been raised from the dead, dies no more. Death no longer rules over him. For in that he died to sin once for all, but in that he lives to Elohim. So you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to what? To sin. All right? But alive to Elohim in Messiah Yahushua our Master. Therefore, do not let sin, what's that next word? Reign in your mortal body to, look at this word, obey it in its desires. That means don't put yourself under sin's authority, because you are making it your master. That's kind of like making it Rabbi, my master. All right? Verse 13. Neither present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourself to Elohim as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to Elohim. For sin shall not, what are those next three words? Rule over you. For you are not under the law, but under favor. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under Torah, but under favor? Let it not be. What Torah? The Torah of sin. That's what he's been talking about, amen? That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about like we were reading in YHWH today, where the blessings and the curses are, well, then you won't get these blessings either. You know, he's not talking about that. He's talking about the Torah of sin. All right, verse 16. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves servants for obedience, you are servants of the one whom you obey, whether of sin to death or obedience to righteousness? Boy, that's real inconvenient. But you did see my tongue ensconced firmly in my cheek when I said that, right? But thanks to Elohim that you were servants of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of teaching to which you were entrusted. Okay, now how does John define sin? Transgression of the Torah. All right, keep that in mind as we read this. And having been set free from sin, let's read it a different way. And having been set free from the transgression of the law, you became servants of righteousness. That's how you become servants of righteousness even before circumcision. But remember that circumcision is what? It's the seal of righteousness through belief. Amen? All right, verse 19. I speak as a man because of the weakness of your flesh. For even as you did present your members as servants of uncleanliness and of lawlessness, resulting in lawlessness, so now present your members as servants of righteousness, resulting in set apartness. Kind of hard to do that and have this idea that not being under the law means it doesn't apply anymore. All right? Verse 20, for when you were servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. Man, when you were servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. What fruit therefore were you having then over which you are now ashamed? For the end therefore is death. Well, why were you not ashamed? Why were you not ashamed then and now you are? Because the belief has brought you to obedience of what? Righteousness, which is what? The Torah. All right? So that you are not under the punishment of it. All right? Verse 22. But now, having been set free from sin, and having become servants of Elohim, you have your fruit resulting in set apartness, and the end, everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the wages of transgressing the Torah is death, but the favorable gift of Elohim is everlasting life in Messiah Yahushua our Master. All right? Paul's saying that before you believed, Paul is saying that before you believed Yahushua, sin reigned over you. All right? It was your Rabbi. It was your Abba, the father of what you followed. It reigned over you, you served it. But now, your master is Yahushua to bring you to righteousness of obedience through belief, and Elohim is who you serve. That's not that hard to understand, unless you make it hard to understand. All right. Now, turn with me to John chapter 8. We're going to come back to Romans in a minute. John chapter 8. We looked at this last week, but I want to make sure that we did it again in context with Romans 6. Because last week I just referred to it, and today we read it. So, John 8, we're going to start reading in verse 28. We're going to be on page 1029. John 8:28. So Yahushua said to them, when you lift up the Son of Adam, then you shall know that I am He, and that I do none at all of myself, but as the Father taught me, these words I speak. and he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. As he was speaking these words, many believed in him. So Yahushua said to those Yehudim who believed him, if you stay in my word, you are truly my taught ones. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And then these are not his believers, but the Pharisees it's talking about next, right? They answered him, we are the seed of Abraham, and have become servants to no one at any time. So there's that seed aspect again. And this, all right, how do you say you shall become free? And I remind you that these were fellows who were currently under Roman rule. These were fellows who had been carried off into Babylon. It was there that they served 70 years. And they're saying, we haven't been servants to anyone. Verse 34, Yahushua answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone doing sin is a servant of sin. Do you see that? A servant to sin. Does that sound a little familiar to something we were reading just a few minutes ago? All right. That means sin rules over you if you are its servant. And that's what we just read in Romans 6. Amen? Paul's not saying anything different than Yahushua is saying right here. Verse 35. And the servant does not stay in the house forever. A son stays forever. If then the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. Now look what Yahushua says. I know that you are the seed of Abraham. You see that? Yahushua says he knows that they are the seed of Abraham, and that word is sperma. All right? But a little further down he says that they are not, and he tells why. Verse 37. I know that you are seed of Abraham, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. See that father stuff going on? All right. They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Yahushua said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Okay, now he said just a minute ago, I know that you're seed of Abraham, but now he's saying if Abraham was your father, right? He's pointing out this is talking about metaphorically in the sense of following what you're being taught by your teacher, right? Do you realize that when he says this, I'm going to read it again, they answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Yahushua said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Do you realize that he's virtually saying the same thing as Paul, and that is that your circumcision has become uncircumcision. That's exactly what he's saying here. All right? But you seek to kill me, a man who has spoken to you the truth which I heard from Elohim. Abraham did not do this. You do the works of your father. He's not talking about Abraham here. Then they said to him, we were not born of whoring. We have one father, Elohim. Yahushua said to them, if Elohim were your father, you would love me, for I came forth from Elohim, and I am here. For I have not come of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not know what I say? Because you are unable to hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you wish to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and has not stood in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. You are not following the teachings of Abraham as your father. You are following the teachings of the devil. So you have made him your father. Do you see what he's saying there? Verse 45. I'm going to interject something here. He's also telling them, this system that you guys are serving and that you're following is built on lies. And your father, the devil, is the father of the lie. Verse 45. And because I speak the truth, you do not believe me? Who of you proves me wrong concerning sin? And if I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? I guess you could have circumcised flesh and not have a circumcised heart. Maybe. Yeah. He who is of Elohim hears the words of Elohim, therefore you do not hear because you are not of Elohim. When the devil is your ruler, when the devil is your ruler, you are indeed under the curse of the Torah. It's hard to find a good place to stop without reading the whole letter of Romans. It is. It's hard to find a good place to stop. We're going to go to Romans 8. We're going to start reading in verse 1. And I remind you that part of the reason that we started this little series here is because of people using Paul to create a different standard scenario that we were talking about before, and this is a dangerous thing. This is a dangerous thing. And we are doing this to find out if is Paul really teaching that, because see, if he is breaking and teaching to break, he's least in the kingdom of heaven. We know that. Yahushua said that. And if you use Paul as a witness to say that the Torah's been done away with, when Yahushua said it wasn't, you're relegating him to what? Irrelevance. You know. And when you tell somebody Yahushua said and they say, yeah, but Paul said, you're relegating him to irrelevance. Romans 8, verse 1. There is then now no condemnation to those who are in Messiah Yahushua, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For the Torah of the Spirit of the life in Messiah Yahushua has set me free from the law of sin and of death. The law of sin and death. That's what you are being set free from. Because when you keep the commandments, there is no Torah against you. It's like that fellow I've told you about before that said, if you don't stick your fingers in dirt, you don't get dirty fingers. Okay? If you don't break the Torah, you're not a Torah breaker. You know? If you don't steal, you're not a thief. There's no Torah against not stealing. There's no Torah against staying true to your spouse. There's no Torah against not taking somebody's life. All right? For the Torah of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yahushua has set me free from the law of sin and death. Verse 3. For the Torah being powerless and that it was weak through the flesh, Elohim having his own Son in the likeness of flesh of sin and concerning sin, condemned sin in the flesh, so that the righteousness of the Torah should be completed in us who do walk according to the flesh, but not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Do you see that? The righteousness of the Torah. All right. Verse 5. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the matters of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the matters of the Spirit. For the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mind of the flesh is enmity towards Elohim, for it does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim, but neither indeed is it able. Let's read that again. You see that one? That's a good, strong one right there. All right. Because the mind of the flesh is enmity towards Elohim, for it does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim. Neither indeed is it able. He's not saying that we do not have to keep the Torah. He's saying we must if we believe. Right? And those who are in the flesh are unable to please Elohim. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of Elohim dwells in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Messiah, this one is not his. And if Messiah is in you, the body is truly dead on account of sin. He's not saying your body is without life in it. He's saying is dead on account of sin. But the spirit is life on account of what? Righteousness. And if the spirit of him who raised Yahushua from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Messiah from the dead shall also give life to your mortal bodies through the Spirit dwelling in you. So then, brothers, we are not debtors to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you are going to die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of Elohim, these are sons of Elohim. What's this? For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. All right? The Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of Elohim. And if children, also heirs, truly heirs of Elohim, and co-heirs with Messiah, if indeed we suffer with Him, in order that we also be exalted together. Wow. That's some strong stuff there. Well, Chris was talking about that earlier. You got to work, set up all these systems to get around it. We'll go back to the same thing. Why not just do what He says? That's it. Just why not just do what He says? Now, before we conclude, I want to show you 4 things concerning Paul's testimony about Paul. Okay? We're going to try to do the short version of this. And of course, all what we're about to read is after Paul's conversion. Turn with me to book Acts chapter 21. Now, we're going to pick up here in 21, and I point out that there's only 28 chapters. So this chapter, there's only 7 chapters after this right here, and so I'm pointing this out to say there's not a lot of book to cover here. Before we get to the end, I want you to watch what happens here 4 times. Acts 21, we're going to start reading in verse 17. And when we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. And on the following day, Shaul went in with us to Jacob and all the elders. That would be James. And having greeted them, he was relating one by one what Elohim had done among the Gentiles through his service. And when they heard it, they praised the Master, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Yehudim there are who have believed, and all are ardent for the Torah." Now, why would he point that out if it doesn't matter anymore? Sure, I'm glad Paul's there to straighten these guys out. You know it. And they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Yehudim, all the Jews, who are among the Gentiles, to forsake Moshe, saying not to circumcise the children, nor to walk according to the practices. What then is it? They shall certainly hear that you have come. Who is this? Believers who are ardent for the Torah. Believers in Yahushua who are ardent for the Torah. All right? Verse 22. What then is it? They shall certainly hear that you have come. So do this, what we say to you. Notice they didn't say, we heard the same thing, and we're trying to figure out what's up with you. All right? It said, so do this, what we say to you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be cleansed with them, and pay their expenses, so that they shave their heads, and all shall know that what they have been informed about you is not so, but that you yourself also walk orderly, keeping the Torah. Did this seem to be kind of important to the taught ones who are getting together with Paul here? You go until the offering can be made. so that what they have been informed about you is not so, but that you yourself also walk orderly, keeping the Torah. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should keep themselves from what is offered to idols and blood and what is strangled and whoring. And then Shaul took the men on the next day, and having been cleansed with them, went into the set-apart place to announce the completion of the days of separation until the offering should be presented for each one of them. So why did Paul do this? So, to show all the people that what they had been informed about him was not so, but that he himself walked orderly, keeping the Torah. Amen? Isn't that what that's what the driving force behind this was. And Paul did it. And I usually like to point out that Paul was not a pushover. Paul rebuked Peter to his face. Paul had been stoned. Paul had been thrown overboard. Paul had been imprisoned, a whole lot of stuff. And if Paul had thought there was something wrong with this, I think that he would have taken an opportunity to straighten these guys out. All right? But that's not what he did. He went to the set-apart place the next day to show that what the people had been informed about him was not so, but that he also walked orderly, but keeping the Torah. All right? Acts 21:27. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Yehudim from Asia, seeing him in the set-apart place, were stirring up all the crowd, and they laid hands on him, crying out, and look at what they are saying. Men of Israel, help. This is the man who is teaching all men everywhere against the people and the Torah and this place. Right? You see, this is the very reason that he went with the men to the set-apart place until the offering could be made for each one of them, to show that what they'd been informed, what these guys were saying wasn't so. All right? But he's still going to get charged with it. He's still going to get charged with it. All right, keep it reading on. And besides, he also brought Greeks into the set-apart place and has profaned this set-apart place because they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city, whom they thought that Shaul had brought into the set-apart place. Okay, that's one. I told you it's fourth thing. That's one of them right there. All right, Paul went to prove what the people had heard was not so. Okay, next. This is where he's taken to the governor, because there's a big uprising and Paul gets arrested, and we're going to turn to Acts 24. Acts 24. I told you we're going to do the short version of this. We're going to start reading in verse 1, the shorter version. Acts 24, verse 1. And after 5 days, the high priest, Conaniah, came down with the elders and a certain speaker, Tertullus, and they brought charges against Shaul before the governor. And when he called upon Tertullus, began to accuse him, saying, having obtained great peace through you and reforms being brought to this nation by your forethought, we accepted always and in all places, most excellent Felix, with all thanks. But in order not to hinder you any further, I beg you to hear us briefly in your gentleness. For having found this man a plague who stirs up dissension among all the Yehudim throughout the world, and ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also tried to profane the set-apart place. It was kind of fun by bringing somebody like you in there. Who tried to profane the set-apart place, and whom we seized and wished to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. And by examining him yourself, you shall be able to know all these matters of which we accuse him. And the Yehudim also agreed, maintaining that these matters were so. And when the governor had motioned him to speak, Shaul answered, knowing that for many years you have been a judge of this nation, I gladly defend myself, seeing you are able to know that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship, and they neither found me in the set-apart place, disputing with anyone, nor stirring up the crowd, either in the congregation or in the city. Nor are they able to prove the charges which they now accuse me. All right? Verse 14. And this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, the Nazarenes, that they call a sect, so I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all that has been written in the Torah and in the prophets. Did you see what Paul just said? He just denied the charges against him. All right? So that's two. That's twice he's denied speaking against the Torah. All right? Acts 25. He's getting taken to the next appeal. 25:1. Festus, therefore, having come to the province, 3 days later went from Caesarea to Jerusalem, and the high priest and the chief men of the Yehudim informed him against Shaul, and they begged him, asking a favor against him, that he would send him to Jerusalem, making a plot along the way to kill him. I thought that was against the Torah. Anyway, then indeed Festus answered that Shaul should be kept in Caesarea, and that he himself was about to set out shortly. Therefore, he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man, to see if there is any fault in him. And having spent more than 10 days among them, he went down to Caesarea, and on the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Shaul to be brought. And when he had come, the Yehudim who had come down from Jerusalem stood about, bringing many and heavy charges against Shaul, which they were unable to prove, while Shaul said in his own defense, here's number 3, neither against the Torah of the Yehudim, nor against the set-apart place, nor against Caesar did I commit any sin. Okay, why does he keep bringing this stuff up about the Torah? Why does he keep saying, I haven't spoken anything against the Torah? We read about Paul's journey to Rome. And after getting to Rome, we read the following. 28. All right, so turn 28. 27 is when the voice takes place. All right, 28, verse 17. And it came to be after 3 days that Shaul called the leaders of the Yehudim together. And when they had come together, he said to them, men, brothers, though I have done none at all against our people or the practices of our father, I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, who, when they had examined me, intended to let me go, but because there was no cause for putting me to death. All right. So there are 4 times in the book of Acts since we started reading in chapter 21. All right, 4 times since 21 that we see him denying that he's speaking against the Torah and that the charges that the Jews were bringing against him are not true. Now, I know that the church keeps advancing this idea that what the Jews were saying about Paul is what Paul was doing. Now, isn't that a funny situation? Paul's denying these charges that the Jews are bringing against him, and the church keeps acting like they're true. The difference is the Jews wanted to put him to death for it, and the church wants to set him up ahead of Yahushua. And he's denying it either way. All right? But who are we going to believe? The church and the Jews who had Paul arrested? Or are we going to believe Paul? That's a no-brainer, isn't it? You'd think. You see, Paul was standing against those who said that the Gentiles who were turning to Elohim must be circumcised first. All right? Because belief that worked obedience would lead them to it, just like with Abraham. All right? Abraham, a Gentile who believed in Elohim, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. You don't have to turn here. I'll read this one to you because there's just one here. Genesis 26:5 says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, and my Torah. He pointed out that it was the same rules for Abraham, who was the father of circumcision. Yahushua said that if Abraham was your father, you'd do the works of Abraham. And Paul can't very well have Abraham as his father if he's teaching believers that believers are not expected to obey Yahweh's voice, His charge, His commands, His laws, and His Torah too. That's strong. Paul can't very well have Abraham as his father if he is teaching that believers are not expected to obey Yahweh's voice and guard His charge, His commands, His laws, and His Torah too, just like Abraham and just like Yahushua. You know what I mean? It's a very dangerous teaching that Gentiles who are turning to Elohim have a different set of standards, and that would include circumcision. It's just not the first thing. It's just not the first thing. Our last passage today is Matthew 3. Matthew 3. I think that's how we started our series out. Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist, sees the Pharisees and the Sadducees coming up, and in verse 7 he says, and seeing many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his immersion, he said to them, brood of adders, who has warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Bear therefore fruits worthy of what? Repentance. And do not think to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, as father. For I say to you that Elohim is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. And how can He do that? He can do it the same way that He did with Abraham. And in the same way He can do it with anyone. He turns that heart of stone into a heart of flesh, of belief to repentance. First comes the circumcised heart, before the circumcision of the flesh. And that's when you become a son of Abraham, a seed of Abraham, a child of Abraham. And so, speaking of that circumcised heart, what have you been doing? Yevrakeka Yahweh ba'ish mereka ya'er Yahweh panavaleka bikuneka. Yisa Yahweh panavaleka v'yasem lakas shalom. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make His face to shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up His face upon you and give you His complete contentment.